Hi guys, today I'm going to demo Random Flow. It's a add-on for Blender. It basically creates random geometry on top of your base meshes. Um, it's a really powerful add-on. It's something I've been wanting to try for a while now, and I was just recently able to dive in to kind of just figure out some basic workflows and see how I could incorporate it into my everyday workflow. So I just wanted to kind of share some of that information with you. So what we'll do here is we'll start with a cube. I'll just scale it on the X just to get more of a rectangular form. And then from here, we're going to open up the random flow menu. Now to do that, all you have to do is hit Shift Q on your keyboard. And the first thing we'll check is auto smooth for the model. And then we'll hit Shift Q again, and we're going to turn on auto mirror. Now when you turn on auto mirror, you have to select the model that you want to mirror. So we'll just select our mesh here. And now we have to pick the axis that we want the model to mirror on. And I think for this model, it'll work best if we choose X, Y, and Z. So just hit X, Y, and Z on the keyboard and then hit Enter. And now if we go into Tab and select a vertice and move it, you can see that the model is mirrored properly. So from here now, we're just going to refine the basic shape of the sci-fi crate, and then we'll add additional detail using random flow. So let's just select these edges. Let's select this edge first, and we'll bevel this. And now we'll select this top edge and bevel that. And now this just gives us a little more interesting shape to work with. Now, one thing that we do have to do in order for random flow to properly add detail and give us a better result is we have to add some division on the surfaces of this model. So I'll just insert some edge loops here and one here. And with random flow, it's going to always work best if you have quads on your model. Random flow can still calculate mesh detail if you have triangles, but if you have n-gons, my understanding is that random flow will basically just ignore those surfaces. I don't think it can calculate mesh detail wherever there's n-gons present. So if we want mesh detail on the top, which we do, we're going to have to cut some edges on the surface here. So let's go ahead and do that. Cut here. And then we still have an n-gon right here, so we'll just cut these areas as well. All right, and we should be good to go now. So with random flow, the way it works is whatever faces you select, random flow is going to add detail to those areas. For our crate to start with, I want to add detail everywhere on the model, so I'm going to select all of the faces, but you can select specific faces like this and then run random flow and it'll add details to just those areas. So let's go ahead and hit A to select all the faces, and then I'll hit Tab to go into object mode. And the reason why we're doing this is it's just easier to see the detail when we go into object mode. If I stayed in edit mode, we would have the faces selected and see wireframe and things, and sometimes it can just be harder to see. So when we're in object mode, because we selected all those faces in edit mode, random flow is still going to remember that all those faces are selected, and it's going to properly add the detail to the model according to that selection. So again, we'll do Shift Q to bring up the random flow menu. And the two options that we're going to use to add detail to this model is the random loop extrude and the random panels. Now, the difference between these two is that the random loop extrude, it's going to add layers of detail with lots of depth and more randomness, whereas the random panels, if you just imagine this flat surface here, the random panels are going to add more like metal panel detail with cuts on the surface, but it's going to feel flatter. The panels are still going to be floating on top of the original mesh, but it's not going to have the depth that you get from the random loop extrude. So let's go ahead and select the random loop extrude. Now, when I first opened up this menu, I looked at all these boxes with these values in it, and it was overwhelming, to say the least. But after watching some videos online and seeing how it works, it makes sense in a way. I'm not going to say that, all of this is crystal clear and I understand all of it, but I think also part of the process of random flow anyways is it's not that this is an exact science. It's more of a trial and error type of add-on where you adjust these values, and it's also dependent on what object you're applying these details to. So it is random in a way, and it is that trial and error and just looking at your model while you're adjusting things until you get something that works for that model. So let's go ahead and we'll kind of activate the first setting. So we have the loops, ratio, and seed up here. So this first row is the loops, this second row is ratio, and this third row is the seed. Now the key to this, and the key to making the model look good and interesting, is you want to have multiple loops selected. That's going to add more layering to the detail of your model. So if I select this first loop, you can already see like we're starting to get some detail here. Now, one thing you notice, when I move my cursor off that menu, the menu disappeared. To get that back, you just have to hit F9 on your keyboard, and it will remember the settings that you had. So we have the first loop selected. We're going to hold Shift and select the second loop. And then we'll hold Shift again and select the third loop. Now, this, from testing and from watching other videos, it does seem like 3 loops is kind of like the ideal selection for getting, a decent looking model over here. Okay, so again, we lost the menu, so hit F9. Now the other key to making this look good is for the ratio for each of these loops. You just want to make sure that these values, are different from each other. So usually what we could do to start is maybe for the first loop, I'll set this ratio to 40. For the second loop, I'll set the ratio to 50. And for the third loop, I'll set the ratio to 60. Now, the seed for each of these loops, these will just kind of randomize the way the detail is applied to the model. At least that's my understanding of what's going on. So again, this whole process is just going back and forth and tweaking values. Now this loop's inset depth, this controls how much depth there is from the original model to the newly added detail. And again, you want to make sure that these values all just are different from each other. You want to make sure they're not the same. So, again, this is just tweaking the values till you get something that you think looks good. So we'll just go back and forth, adjusting detail. Like that. Okay. All right, now this loops subdivision. Basically, this is just adding more division on the loops to then add more detail. So if I crank this up, you see we're already getting more interesting detail just by adding one division. So for each of these, it's just, again, trial and error, just switching values back and forth, trying to figure out what is the right number for the kind of look I'm trying to get. Now the loops panel size, again, it changes the size of the detail. So for each of these, you can adjust the value and just see if you start to get something that you think feels like a strong design, something that feels, like a model that you were trying to achieve. Again, it's just playing with all these numbers and you can even see just from playing with some of these values the difference you can get in the variation. It's pretty incredible. Something like that. Now the base cut will, I believe, add division to your base mesh. This cut smooth. If you have a cylindrical object and it's low poly, this will, I believe it'll attempt to smooth the surfaces when you add detail on top so that you don't see faceting. From testing, it kind of works, but I feel like you're better off just starting with a higher resolution object as opposed to where an object like this, it can be fairly low poly just because a lot of the surfaces are flat. There's no curvature to them. But for like a cylinder, I feel like you're just better off maybe starting with, a higher resolution mesh. Okay. This triangulate setting here, if you were to crank this up, it will add triangulation to the surface, but as you can see, sometimes it doesn't really give you the best results, so usually I avoid that. And then this clip center, if you were to ever have like seams where the model is being mirrored, if you have clip center checked and you crank this distance up, it will get rid of those seams. Okay, and all right, I think that works. Okay, so there's a good start to our crate. So from here, I'm going to add just a few more details, I think. So first we can try, we'll do Shift Q again, and we'll try the random panels. And you can see how it like I was saying, there's not as much depth to them. But for surfaces like this, I think it works well. Okay. And then for areas like this, I would go through and just do more traditional modeling. So we can duplicate this face, move it up, extrude it. Bevel this edge, inset, extrude this down. Then we can duplicate this face, add some division, select these, inset. Then we can set this to individual. Something like that. Move this down. Like that. Maybe add some detail here. And again, for this demo, I'm, going through some of this quickly. I'm not going to add the level of detail I would add if I was, really putting the time into developing a final model. But again, this is really just for demonstration purposes. So, take more time than I'm taking right now. I would not move this quickly. I would put more thought into a lot of these details. I would add more detail in areas and clean certain areas up. Okay. And Right, we'll just add this last detail. All right, yeah, and just like that, you already have a a pretty nice model for not really putting a whole lot of time into it. And that's really the power of this add-on. It's it allows you to iterate your designs quickly and really nail down that concept a lot faster, while also not wearing you out, because it's hard when you're trying to build and design at the same time. But this add-on, it makes that process fun. It's just so fast, and the results speak for themselves. Like, yes, I would take this model a lot further if I was if I wasn't doing this for demo purposes. But again, even for the time that has been put in it so far, I mean, there's a lot of nice things going on with this so far, and there's a lot to work with, and that's the power of this add-on. So again, I think it's a really amazing tool, and I would recommend it to everyone out there. And I think I think that's it. But hopefully you learned something. Hopefully you got something out of this. Again, thank you so much for watching, and take care.